We are. We're going high tech today. We got a PowerPoint and everything. Provided it works. If you will, turn over to Revelation. That's where we'll camp out for the most part. Revelation chapter 3. Tell you, it's been a full day. It's been a full day. It's been a full weekend, really, for me, but it's been a full day. On Friday, I went to bed with a funny feeling in my eye, and I woke up, and I'll show you a picture of my eye halfway shut when I woke up. I think I have a sty, or like 3 of them all working together against me. Anyway, that was brutal. Then Courtney and I and the kids were up at Affirming the Faith this weekend, which was awesome. It was edifying, fun. It was a really good weekend, but it was also, 6.5 hours in the car, and so that was tough. And then we get back, and Sunday mornings are always a rush, right? If you didn't remember what it was like with kids, Sunday mornings are way more of a rush with children. So we get out, we get to Bible class, we get here, we're trying to keep them quiet the whole time. Dad said, "How was my lesson this morning?" I said, "I didn't hear a word." Sometimes I don't, So then this afternoon we got to, these are all fun things. These are all good things, right? But this afternoon we got to go to the Dallas Mavericks and the Phoenix Suns basketball game that started at noon and ended in time for us to get back. Me, Dad, and every Lenhart in the building, all right? It was awesome. The unfortunate part is that they're Suns fans for some bizarre reason. But anyway, no, it was a lot of fun. But now I have to preach, all right? And I'll tell you what, I am tired. But this is a message from God's word, and he can, like we'll see in a little bit, do a lot with a little. And so tonight is not about who's giving the message or their mental fatigue of the weekend, but it's about God's word. And so I'm excited to look at what we're looking at tonight. Here we're going to talk about hot and cold. And when I was looking at the PowerPoint, I saw this, beautiful slide, and I was like, you know what? That kind of works perfectly. It was on the templates. Perfect template for hot and cold. It even has it on the right side. So when we typically hear a lesson about being hot or cold, we'll go to Revelation chapter 3, and we'll read there in verse 15 that Jesus, through John, is speaking to the church in Laodicea and says, "I wish you were either hot or cold. I wish you were either, but because you're lukewarm, I'm going to spit you out of my mouth," right? And we read that, and we've heard probably dozens of lessons on this passage in the past, right? And we've probably heard some really good lessons. Almost always, the lesson that I've heard is dealing with apathy, right? I think I remember a whole lesson called Overcoming Apathy, and it was a good lesson. This is not to knock any of those lessons, because they were good lessons. I remember one lesson I heard was a guy, he put a couple of chairs on the stage, and he said, chair 1, you've got the person who's on fire for Christ, maybe the new Christian. Chair 2, you've got the person who's been a Christian for a while but still excited about it. Chair 3, you have the person who's going through the motions, the lukewarm person. He went all the way through and made the application and just said, "Hey, which chair are you in? Let's be reflective about it." And he used this passage to talk about that. It was a great lesson. The problem is, when we interpret this lesson the way that we interpret it, we're removing ourselves several steps from the context in which it was written. We have a tendency to read those words hot and cold and read them as a metaphor for feelings, which is a metaphor that really only works in the English language. In other language, to say someone is hot means something totally different, or to say someone is cold means something totally different. And so in English, we have this phrase, hot or cold, meaning excited, motivated, or disinterested and against it. And then we've taken our English understanding, applied that to these words, given them emotional attributes of how we feel about things. Are we feeling hot or feeling cold? And then we've applied that to the Christian life. Be very clear. I think the lessons on this passage have been beautiful, have been beneficial. I'm not saying anyone is wrong in what they were teaching. I just don't think it's what Jesus through John was teaching. I think there was something else here that we're missing. And the real problem is this, because if you take those words to mean emotional feelings about something, then what Jesus says through John in Revelation chapter 3 is, I would rather you be all the way for me or all the way against me, not going through the motions. I don't know about you, but that's just never sat very well with me. I think Jesus would rather someone go through the motions and then get woken up later as opposed to being adamantly against. I mean, you even remember when the disciples were going out and they found someone casting out demons in his name, but he didn't walk with us. Jesus said, listen, if they're not against us, they're for us. Like you don't see that idea of, man, I'd rather you be an atheist or a preacher, nowhere in between. Like you don't see that idea in the scripture anywhere else except for the way that we see it right here in this passage, which is the first clue that, hey, maybe something else is going on here. Now, if we're going to understand exactly what's going on, then naturally we're going to have to do my favorite thing, which is look at some context. So look at Revelation chapter 2 and Revelation chapter 3. We're going to try and keep this a little bit big picture and not get too bogged down in here. But in Revelation chapter 2, Jesus is speaking to John by way of Revelation. John is writing down the things that he was hearing from Jesus. If you have a Words of Christ in red version, you'll notice there's a whole bunch of red in Revelation. That's because this is what Jesus came to John to tell him to write to these churches. And so you have, beginning in chapter 2, you'll notice the phrase, to the angel of the church in Ephesus. Skip a little bit further in verse 8, to the angel of the church in Smyrna. You've got 2. Verse 12, to the angel of the church in Pergamum. Verse 18 of chapter 2, to the angel of the church in Thyatira. Then in chapter 3 and verse 1, to the angel of the church in Sardis. Chapter 3 and verse 7, to the angel of the church in Philadelphia. Who knew? We had a letter written to the city of brotherly love. And then in verse 14, the 7th, to the angel of the church in Laodicea. So what you have here in the middle of John's letter of Revelation are 7 mini letters. Really what we've got is a letter of letters, right? At least this chunk is a letter of letters, which is not the same as the King of Kings, but similar, I guess. It was said by the King of Kings. So you've got these 7 letters to these 7 different churches. Now, what's important about these is that each letter addresses something a specific church is dealing with in their place and in their context. And so when Paul writes to Smyrna, he's talking about things that are going on in Smyrna. And when he writes to the church in Philadelphia, he talks about how the Sixers are doing, you know? So he's doing things that are specific to what the churches are dealing with, okay? And so when you read through it, you'll notice there's a lot of, well, honestly, when you read through Revelation, you notice there's a lot of stuff, like weird images, weird sentences, weird structure to things. And what it really is a combination of 2 things. So when John is writing to these churches, he is pulling from 2 sources to put together a letter that has a message, all right? Source number 1 is the cultural context of that city and church. So he's taking things that they know about, things that they're familiar with, phrases that they're comfortable with, fashion trends in some cases. You'll get what I'm saying about that in a second. And he'll use those, and he'll put that into his letter because they're things that they understand. The second source of material is the text. Old Testament, most often, Old Testament text that he'll use images from the Old Testament or phrases from the Old Testament, very similar to what we studied in the Gospel of John and how he weaves the Old Testament all throughout his Gospel. He'll do the same thing with all of Revelation, but especially these specific letters to these churches. So he's blending context of their situation and context of the entire Bible to give them a message that is beautifully crafted, okay? So then, we get to the letter to Laodicea, which is the seventh. It's the last letter, and it's right here, Revelation 3:14 through 23. So let's go ahead and read through this quickly and get a little bit of understanding what's going on in Laodicea. Verse 14 is where it starts. It says, "And to the angel of the church in Laodicea write the words of the Amen, the faithful and true witness, the beginning of God's creation. I know your works. You are neither cold nor hot. Would that you were either cold or hot. So because you are lukewarm and neither hot nor cold, I will spit you out of my mouth. For you say, I am rich, I have prospered, and I need nothing, not realizing that you are wretched, pitiable, poor, blind, and naked. I counsel you to buy from me gold refined by fire, so that you may be rich, and white garments, so that you may clothe yourselves, and the shame of your nakedness may not be seen, and salve to anoint your eyes." I need some of that. "Salve to anoint your eyes, so that you may see. Those whom I love, I reprove and discipline. So be zealous and repent. Behold, I stand at the door and knock. If anyone hears my voice and opens the door, I will come in to him and eat with him, and he with me. The one who conquers, I will grant to him to sit with me on my throne, as I also conquered and sat down with my Father on his throne. He who has an ear, let him hear what the Spirit says to the churches." So much in this is challenging if you don't know what he's talking about. It sounds interesting. Now on the surface level, look at a couple of things. Like right off the bat, if you're just a careful reader and you don't know any of the context, and this is what's so unbelievably beautiful about the Bible, is if you are a surface reader who has no context, you can still get everything you need out of it. But if you have the context, it enriches it that much more. Awesome. It's almost like it was divinely written or something. So look at right here in verse 17. It says, "For you say, I am rich, I've prospered, I need nothing, not realizing that you are wretched, pitiable, poor, blind, and naked." Okay? Here are your problems: wretched, pitiable, poor, blind, and naked. Then, as he counsels them, buy from me gold refined by fire, that you may be rich. Solution to one of the problem. And white garments, that you may clothe yourself, not naked, not poor, and salve to anoint your eyes so that you're able to see. All right, and so what Jesus is doing here through John is he's saying, listen, you all think you have these things figured out, but in actuality, you have desperate needs of things. I have the solution to those things. Simply put, that's what he's telling them, right? But the examples he uses are awesome. Here's what we need to know about Laodicea. Is this the next one? This is why we have a presentation today, because maps are important and fun. Laodicea is a really interesting city. As you start studying about ancient Rome and Laodicea, you learn a couple of things. Laodicea was awesome. Like they were proud of themselves for things they deserved to be proud of themselves for. Apparently there was an earthquake that shook up Rome and destroyed some cities, and so the Roman government sent out some relief money to help these cities rebuild, and Laodicea rejected outright the relief money and said, "Don't worry, we'll take care of it ourselves." Historically, that's viewed as something very good, commendable. The government wouldn't have said, "How dare you?" They would have said, "Good on you," right? And so they decided to rebuild their own city themselves. Now, this wasn't a little city. This was a huge city, okay? This was a city with people who were from there who were great orators. It would be the equivalent of having an American Idol from your city, right? Like American Idol, the show. Like these orators from this town gave the town recognition, gave the city recognition. They also had a number of people who, once they grew up, married into royalty and married into wealth, which again gives a significant recognition to the city. They also had one of the most prominent gladiator arenas in the ancient world. And so like if you were one of the top gladiators, well, you know how like if you're a great musician, you sell out Madison Square Garden, right? If you were one of the top gladiators, you fought in Laodicea. That's kind of how this works. They were, like I said, a very proud city. and they were a city who had a major mint, a money mint. And they minted coins for the Roman government. Like, they did a lot of it, but they also minted coins for the city. On one of their coins, they had a coin with the inscription, "We did it ourselves," in reference to the rebuilding of their own city that they didn't need a government handout for, which is just kind of cool. And honestly, kind of something to be proud of. Like, you see, this was a big city. It had a lot of stuff that was cool. You know, this is the kind of place you'd go on vacation and take a tour of the mint kind of thing. And so they've got a lot of stuff that they're a very proud city, and they really do have a lot of great things going on by worldly standards. They also were big-time exporters of a number of different things. There was a special garment, a special type of cloth. I think, if I'm not getting these mixed up, I think it was a red wool that they had, that they would create in Laodicea. And it was basically like when you see when you see a Buc-ee's T-shirt, you know that person drove through Texas, right? When you saw the red wool, you know they got that from Laodicea because it was synonymous with the city, and it was a really nice piece of fabric. So then, not only were they exporters of clothes and fabrics, and they had like a signature brand, really, the Laodiceans had like a brand associated with their red wool, but they also had this special, I guess salve is the best word, that they would make out of hot springs and hot mineral springs and mud. And it would create this sort of gook that you would put on your eyes, and it is, I don't know, you want to say rumored? Supposedly, it was able to cure some forms of blindness. I don't know, maybe people just had styes, but it was supposedly able to take care of some stuff in your eyes and had healing properties to it, and so they would manufacture that and export it. Laodicea was kind of awesome. They kind of had everything, truthfully. I mean, literally, they had a major sports arena. They had a money mint, a major mint. They had exports of beautiful, nice things. They had healing things that they exported. They had royal people associated with their city. They did it themselves, right? They rebuilt on their own. It was an awesome city. And so, with all of that in the back of your mind, let's read through this section really quickly again in Revelation chapter 3. So John starts by saying, "I know your works, that you're neither hot nor cold. I would that you were either hot or cold, so because you are lukewarm and neither hot nor cold, I will spit you out of my mouth. For you say, I am rich, I have prospered, I need nothing." Sound anything like we did it ourselves? Kind of does. "Not realizing that you are wretched, pitiable, poor, blind, and naked. I counsel you to buy from me gold refined by fire." Well, they don't need gold refined by fire. They have the mint in Laodicea. But that doesn't give the kind of wealth that Jesus gives, okay? "So that you may be rich, and white garments." Well, they don't need white garments. They have fancy red wool, the Laodicean trademark. But that doesn't give the kind of clothing that being clothed with Christ gives. "Garments as white as snow, so that you may clothe yourself, and the shame of your nakedness may not be seen. And," third thing, "salve to anoint your eyes, so that you may see." As these people are reading this letter for the first time, they get it and they go, maybe we are depending on our things more than we're depending on Jesus. Right? Maybe our faith is a little too wrapped up in our mint and our signature brand wool and our special, blindness healing mud. Maybe we're depending on those things more than we're depending on Christ. And what he's saying here plainly is, you think you're good, but you're actually in desperate need of the things I can give you, right? Which is, that's just awesome. Because if you're a Laodicean and you read this letter, you know immediately what he's talking about, all right? Cultural context. It's incredible. Then, here's the one thing Laodicea did not have. Because they've got like everything. But this city of Laodicea didn't have good water. Sort of fundamental to having a good city. That's why all these cities pop up near rivers and oceans. And I mean, water is essential to human life, like in a big, big way. And so Laodicea has all these beautiful things, but they don't have good drinking water. Now that is because they just weren't in a great spot for it. In fact, they had to pipe their water in from these two cities you see on the map. Up there, you see Hierapolis. Hierapolis was known for natural hot springs. They had these hot springs that people would travel from all over to come sit in. They were said to have a level of healing properties, which I think we know today from science that hot springs and heat immersion can help with healing process. And so these hot springs in Hierapolis were natural, hot, and beneficial to those who were around them and visited them. And even today, people will still travel to see the hot springs in ancient Hierapolis. They're a little bit to the, I don't know, for you guys it's this way. You have Colossae. And Colossae was known for their, I've heard it two ways, I think it's a little bit of both, for their fresh, ice-cold mountain spring water, right? So Colossae had access to the most refreshing form of sustaining water that they could possibly have. Laodicea didn't have any of that. So what they did is they piped water in from Hierapolis and from Colossae. And by the time it got to Laodicea, guess what it was? It wasn't hot and it wasn't cold. It was lukewarm. And what's worse about that is this water, these two waters, when they combined and by the time they got there, and by the time this, ancient plumbing, which wasn't so great, but it was several miles worth of plumbing, by the time this water got to Laodicea, this is awesome, it would develop a chemical in it called I knew I had this written down. There it is. It was lukewarm, and it was full of calcium carbonate. Now, calcium carbonate, I don't know what it is. I bet AJ could tell you exactly what it is. It's going to make you sick, right? You drink too much calcium carbonate, you get some of that in your stomach, and guess what happens? You vomit. Does anyone else's version say, vomit you out of my mouth? Boy, that sounds like they might have known what he was talking about. And so you've got this letter where Jesus, through John, is teaching these people about what it means, what this church needs to do to be living like Christ, right? You need to not depend on the things that you have. You need to depend on Christ and what he can bring to your life. And then you've got this introduction that doesn't really seem like they're depending on the water, but it also doesn't seem like he's talking about their spiritual temperature, whether they're hot or cold. They're talking about something else. What you've got here is, I was supposed to do this. I'm terrible at PowerPoint. Yeah, they would pipe in the hot from Hierapolis, the cold from Colossae, and by the time it got there, it was lukewarm and full of calcium carbonate, and it would make them vomit. So you read this verse in 15 and 16. It says, I know your works that you're neither cold nor hot. I would rather that you were either cold or hot. So because you are lukewarm and neither hot nor cold, I will vomit you out of my mouth. These people in Laodicea read that introduction to their letter and knew, that is the one thing we don't have here in Laodicea is good water. Our water is lukewarm, unenjoyable, and makes you vomit. Wow. So here's what's actually happening. This is what is going on in this letter. Jesus through John is using a brilliant object lesson, right? He's using things that people knew about, were familiar with, that they saw all over their world, something that was integral to what they did every day. Do you remember, it may have been a year ago at this point, when Michael Avedikian got up for a Wednesday night lesson, and he walked over here, and I don't even remember which one it was, because it never made any sense, but he pointed somewhere in this area, right, to one of the bricks that didn't match, and he took the whole lesson and based it, you all know which one it is, but I can never tell, all right? He took the whole lesson and he based it on that brick. Why? Well, because it was an illustration to show us that, hey, sometimes things stick out. Sometimes things don't fit in, right? And so he used something that we saw every day, something we were familiar with, something that we understood, something tangible that we could relate to well, and made a whole lesson. That's exactly what Jesus is doing with the church at Laodicea. He's teaching them a lesson using things they know well. Right? It's no different than Jesus teaching fishermen by using fishing illustrations. It's no different than Jesus teaching, farmers, agricultural people, by using an illustration about the heart being like a seed landing on or the word being like a seed landing on different soils of people's hearts, right? This is exactly the same idea. And when we understand what the city of Laodicea was all about, we understand way better what he's trying to say. So then the question, what is he trying to say? Well, the hot water in Hierapolis, those hot springs, had benefit to them. To live near them was good for you. To visit them was good for you, right? It was useful. The cold water in Colossae was beneficial. To live by it, you had a nearly endless resource of fresh drinking water that literally kept you alive. The lukewarm water in Laodicea was not. By the time it got there, it was completely useless. All it did was make you sick. I don't know if you know this about being sick, but when you are, having stomach trouble and you're vomiting too much, it's actually worse for you to continue drinking water because it'll dehydrate you faster. And so not only was the hot water beneficial and useful, and the cold water was also useful, the lukewarm water was useless. And so he uses this illustration to tell the church at Laodicea, be useful. Be useful. This isn't about being apathetic. This isn't about being either a preacher or an atheist. This is about, listen, do something. Right, you remember the Titans when they're arguing about playing football and Gary Bertier says, come on, man, push him, pull him, do something. Right? This is the sentiment that I keep wanting to say Paul because of our class in 1 Corinthians. This is the sentiment that Jesus is giving this church in Laodicea. Listen, hot water is useful. It can make an impact in the kingdom. Cold water is useful. It can make an impact in the kingdom. Lukewarm water, which is where you guys are sitting right now, isn't just useful, it's detrimental. I would rather you be hot or cold. And you know what? I don't care which one of those you pick. Just don't be lukewarm. Be useful. So this, I think, tracks much more with the teaching of Jesus that we see in the Gospels, as well as the Christian message that we see penned throughout Paul's letters and in the New Testament. 2 Peter chapter 1 and verse 8, Peter is talking about this same idea. He says, if these qualities are yours and are increasing, they keep you from being what? Ineffective or unfruitful in the knowledge of our Lord Jesus Christ. This is a concept that you see all throughout the New Testament. Christians should be useful. They should be working, not ineffective, not unfruitful, but useful, like the hot water or the cold water. So with the little bit of time we have left, we'll do some application. Look at Matthew chapter 25. Look at Matthew chapter 25. Matthew 25, we've got the parable of the talents. Jesus is in the middle of one of his sections in Matthew where he just talks and talks and talks and talks and talks for a couple of chapters, similar to the Sermon on the Mount. Matthew 24, 25 Jesus does a lot of talking and a lot of teaching as well. So in verse 14, he begins the parable of the talents. Let's pick up there. It says, for it will be like a man going on a journey who called his servants and entrusted to them his property. To one he gave 5 talents, to another 2, and to another 1, to each according to his ability. Then he went away. He who had received the 5 talents went at once and traded with them, and he made 5 talents more. So also he who had 2 made 2 talents more. But he who had received the 1 talent went and dug in the ground and hid his master's money. Now after a long time, the master of those servants came and settled accounts with them. And he who had received the 5 talents came forward, bringing 5 talents more, saying, Master, you delivered to me 5 talents, and here I have made 5 more. His master said to him, Well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful over a little. I will set you over much. Enter into the joy of your master. And he said also to the, and he also who had the 2 talents came forward, saying, Master, you delivered to me 2 talents. Here I've made 2 talents more. And his master said to him, Well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful over little. I will set you over much. Enter into the joy of your master. He also who had received the 1 talent came forward, saying, Master, I knew you to be a hard man, reaping where you did not sow and gathering where you scattered no seed. And so I was afraid, and I went and hid your talent in the ground. And here you have what is yours. But his master answered him, You wicked and slothful servant, you knew that I reap where I have not sown and gather where I have not spread seed. Then you ought to have invested my money with the bankers, and at my coming I should have received what was my own with interest. So take the talent from him and give it to him who has 10 talents. For to everyone who has more, to everyone who has will more be given, and to he will have abundance. But from the one who has not, even what he has will be taken away, and cast the worthless servant into the outer darkness, in that place where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. So you've got this story about this wealthy man. He's got 3 servants, and he leaves them varying amounts of money. When you read your footnotes, a talent is just an amount of money. And as he leaves, he doesn't give them any instructions. He just says, hey, take care of it. It's a scene in a TV show I love where a guy tells one of the employees, a boss tells him, hey, I need a rundown of those clients. Can you get that done for me? And the first thing the guy says is, absolutely. And then it cuts to him later, and he says, what in the world is a rundown? And so the theme of the episode is him trying to figure out what is a rundown. He can't figure it out. He keeps trying to use it in a sentence. Hilarity ensues, as always. But this is kind of the idea. Like, hey, can you take care of my money? Take care of how? Make sure it's not lost? Make more of it? Give it away? Use it? I don't know. What does he mean, take care of this money? Well, the first 2 know their master and kind of understand what he's looking for, and they go and they make the sum that he gave them, and they double it. And when they come back, the master is pleased. But the one who only received 1 sum of money, he doesn't do anything with it. He just makes sure nothing is lost and then gives it back. And the master is very, very displeased with him. Now, here's what we need to know about this passage to understand how it applies to us for this lesson. They didn't get the same amount. Not all of them had the same amount of money to take care of. Right? One guy got 5 talents, one guy got 2, and one guy got 1 talent. Notice at the beginning it says that he entrusted his servant's property, and he... oh, goodness, I missed it. It says that he gave them talents there at the end of verse 15, each according to his ability, and then went his way. And so this master knows his servants. He knows what he equipped them with, and he knows what he expects back from them, right? But he didn't give them any real hard and fast instructions. He just equips them according to their ability and says, take care of my money. Not everyone in this room has the same amount of resources. Some of us are really good at some things, and some of us are really bad at those exact same things. Some of us are really good at organizing and planning ahead, so much so that they might even leave the night before they need to if they have enough time, Dan. And some of us are throwing a duffel bag together right before the trip because if we do not leave right now, we are going to be late, right? I mean, listen, some of us have different skills, have different resources, have different talents. Some of us have resources financially to take care of a lot of different things. Some of us do not. Some of us have a lot of extra time on their hands. Some of us do not. Each of these servants was given something different, a different amount. It seems as though it was given to them based on something about who they were. And yet the expectation seems that the master wanted them to do something with it. He wanted them to keep in step, be useful, right? Be useful. He didn't tell them exactly, if you don't double it, you're done for. He just said, hey, be useful. And so I think the application for us simply is do with what you have. Our master's entrusted us things, something. Every single one of us has something that God has given to us that we can use. Some of us, it might be a strong back, and some of us, it might be a sharp wit. Use it. Use it. Do with what you have. You may look at your situation and say, hey, I don't have much. I'm a one-talent guy, no doubt about it. I'm a one-resource person. God does big things. Okay, the kids finish that? With little people, all right? God does big things with little people. If you look at the book of Haggai, when the people are disappointed that their temple doesn't look as beautiful as Solomon's temple, God comes through Haggai and tells them, don't worry, I can do a lot with a little. As a matter of fact, the temple that will be in this place is going to be more glorious than Solomon's ever was. Our God does big things with little people. He can make incredible things happen with people who are flawed, people who are untalented. Paul even mentions that he wasn't a great preacher. Has anyone ever read Paul's letters and thought, how is this guy not a great preacher? He sounds so stinking smart, right? Paul wasn't a great public speaker. Apollos was. He was actually really good at it, Do with what you have. What do you have, and what can you do with it? Number one, do with what you have. God can do big things with little people. Just be useful. Number two, just try. As simple and as plain as we can have it, just try. In fact, the master doesn't seem to have been upset if the one-talent servant just took the money and put it in the bank. He's like, do you think I would have been more mad at you if you had drawn interest on it while I was gone? I was gone a long time at 3% compounding interest. I mean, listen, he seems to say, you didn't have to do anything extraordinary. I didn't expect you to double your money. I only gave you one talent after all. I didn't have a parameter for you to accomplish. All I wanted you to do was try. Just be useful. Just try. And whatever you were doing by trying would have been enough. But you didn't even try. Notice the accusation at the end. He calls him wicked and slothful. You're lazy. You didn't care to put the effort in. Instead, you didn't want to lose the money. And that was the problem with this servant, was that he didn't even try. You think about Jesus in the limited commission. I mean, really, you don't even have to succeed to succeed. When Jesus sent out his disciples 2 by 2, he sent them to places and gave them explicit instructions on what would happen if nobody listened. Because there was going to be places that nobody listened, which to me sounds like failure, but to Jesus sounded like success. Because they did what was asked. They went and they tried to teach the gospel to these places. So you may be asking, or you may have the question, that's great. I need to do with what I have. So what do I have, and what can I do with that? Well, each of us have something we can do, and what we need to do is just try. And here's the brilliance of the Bible. Right after this parable of the talents, you have another parable, or maybe not parable, another story about the final judgment. And we've read through this a number of times. What is the criteria that is given in the final judgment as to whether or not someone was a sheep or a goat? Did you take care of people who were sick? Did you visit those in prison? Did you feed the hungry? Were you useful? Did you do something? Did you take care of anybody? Now, you notice you don't have to have that many talents to do these things. If you're struggling and you're like, man, maybe I'm a one-talent guy, well, all you need is to be able to sit and talk, and you can visit the sick. All you need is to be able to, buy some clothes and take care of some people, to clothe the naked. All you need is to be able to cook adequately, because when people are hungry, it's all good, right? To be able to feed the hungry. So listen, right on the heels of the parable of the talents, Jesus gives a list of beautiful examples of how to be useful and how to use your talents. And the bottom line is, you can't go wrong loving people. You can't go wrong loving people. Just like the church at Laodicea was lukewarm, not being useful in the kingdom, I think the challenge is exactly the same to us today. God would rather us be hot, which means we're helpful in some way, or cold, which means that we are useful in some other way. He doesn't want us to be lukewarm and unuseful or unfruitful in the kingdom of God. This is one of those lessons where we have to ask and have ourselves, give ourselves an examination. Where are we at? Similar to the lesson on apathy, but with a different application. Which chair are we in? Are we useful with what we have? Are we being useful in a way that is new for us? Are we not really being useful at all? I think Jesus' challenge to the church at Laodicea and to the Church of Christ, wherever they meet in 2023, would be useful. And so tonight, as always, we offer the invitation. This is for anyone who is not a Christian to become a Christian, and it's for anyone who has needs of the church to let those needs be made known. So whatever you need this evening, you can let us know, and we will help you if you'll come while we stand and sing.